Welcome back. So today here in the shop we are focused on the 69 Charger, which happens to belong to this guy right here. This is my son Joe. You've seen him on the channel before, but it's been a while. So anything you want to say?
Happy to be here, and I'll leave the rest of the words to talk about this thing.
Okay, well, we're going to do a lot of talking, but we're going to show you a lot of stuff too. So let's just stop it. Let's get after it. I'm Mike. This is Joe, and this is My Car Shop.
Dust off.
Well, we thought we would just have some discussion about like the backstory behind the car, and he can share kind of his thinking and actually how he ended up with this car. So why don't you go back to when you were in college and the first car that you had and what kind of led you to this?
Right. So I had, I think in 2008 or 2007,
Yep.
I was looking for my first car. I had just got my driver's license a little late, I think 17 or 18 years old.
Yep.
And you recommended an Eagle Talon, said those were a ton of fun. And I found 1998 Mitsubishi Eclipse, maybe an hour from here down
Yeah,
near
a
Flint.
couple hours at the most, but yeah. And that's the same car for those that don't know. Eagle Talon, Mitsubishi Eclipse were both Diamond Star. One was under the Mitsubishi brand, one was under the Chrysler brand. So.
Yep, there were actually three different ones, I believe.
Yeah.
There was the Eagle Talon, the Mitsubishi, and then there was a
Plymouth Laser.
Laser.
Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. So we went down and looked at that. That was it's a complete basket case. He had blown the first gear bearing out of the transmission.
Oh, that's right. Mm-hmm.
Transmission was out. Didn't even know if it ran.
It literally came in a 5-gallon bucket.
Yep. So to cut that part of the story short, brought it back, rebuilt the transmission.
Which he did all by himself.
Almost.
3 times.
And that was a ton of fun.
Yeah.
Very, very fun car. Turbo, over 200 horse, and a car that weighs probably less than 2,000 pounds.
Was that an all-wheel drive?
No.
Okay.
Front wheel drive. It was the GST, which
Okay.
was front. And paid about, I think it was $1,500
Yep.
bucks for that. And
It was a Fast and Furious clone car. It was that same lime green. I mean, it wasn't
Sort of.
exactly, but yeah.
sort of, yeah. Definitely influenced by Paul Walker's car in the first Fast and Furious, minus the super racy wing and graphics.
And when I say 3 times on the transmission, I didn't mean it was in and out of the car. It was you put it together and things weren't right, and we looked it over
Yeah.
and you had to take it back apart. So it wasn't
Yeah.
that. It was a major, you know.
It was a big deal. I mean, it was a big job for sure.
Yeah, especially for your first one. So
Yeah. So I had that car for 2 years, I think it was, and started to have a gut feeling that it was time to let it go. It had 160,000 miles on it. Turbo engine had not been treated nicely. And that was actually, now that I think about it, that was the first car that I started doing paint work on.
yes, yep.
That's where I learned to do some Bondo stuff. The previous owner had smashed the whole side of it.
That's right. I forgot about that.
Painted the bumper as well, replaced the bumper cover on the front, and did a little bit of custom masking on that with some of that thin masking tape.
Fine line tape.
Yep. And so I decided to let that go. Made a really nice profit on it. Made almost $2,000 in selling it, and decided to buy a project car. To be honest, I can't even remember exactly why I chose to get a project car, or to.
At that point, you were talking, what I remember is you were talking about getting another Eclipse and pouring and building a really high performance engine, and I suggested that you might want it for the money. For what you put into an engine for that car, you could build an entire muscle car. And I think that's what started the process.
That does sound right, yeah. And as a kid, my favorite TV show was Dukes of Hazzard. I was obsessed with it.
As we all were.
And I had always wanted a General Lee. And so, yeah, I think we started looking for them. I started cruising Craigslist and found a guy down in New Boston near Detroit that actually dealt in Charger stuff almost exclusively.
Yeah.
And he had at least 3 Chargers there on his property.
Well,
I
there was
think.
more because we went out to the farm and he had a bunch out there too.
That's right. Yeah, there was a yellow one out there. It was completely rotted.
It was rotted under the ground. It was worse than stitches.
And he had a reddish orange RT at his house there as well. That he wanted, I think it was $4 or $5 grand
Yeah.
for that one.
Or somewhere in there.
And he also had this one underneath his deck, I think it was.
Yep.
And it was very solid. There was, I mean, considering the age of the car and Michigan, there was almost no rust.
And the B body, which do tend to rust.
Right. Yeah, it was reasonably priced. I think he wanted $2,000 or something
Yeah.
for it.
Somewhere
Yeah,
we have a
something like
picture of
that.
the deck lid with all the prices written on it.
Yeah, 2,000 more or less, and so it was within my price range, and I liked that there wasn't as much rust. It was all collision damage, which I had already been working on with the Eclipse.
Right.
So yeah, decided to pull the trigger and paid him to actually deliver it up to our house. I think it was a week later he
Yep.
delivered it.
He delivered it on a Sunday, if I remember right.
And ended up coming back with the whole trailer load of parts in addition to the car itself.
He threw in a bunch of stuff, and you bought some other stuff, and
Yeah.
he was. You were what, 18 at this point? 19?
I was 20. We
20?
bought it in 2000, or no, 19 probably. We bought it in spring, I'm guessing, of 2010. I do remember kind of feeling like, okay, I have my dream car. What the hell do I do with it? Because it was a massive project.
Yeah.
Really was.
So why don't you talk about some of the damage that was done to the car? You mentioned collision damage, and I've alluded to it and talked a little bit, but you're really the one that you did most of the work yourself.
So for that first year, I didn't actually start a ton of work on the project until that winter when I was back, I think, for winter break from college. And the primary goal at that point was to get the frame rail and this whole corner of the car replaced. Best we can figure, somebody had jumped it and it landed on the front left corner here. And there are pictures we can insert, of course, here. But this whole front frame rail here was bent in maybe, I don't know, 4 or 6 inches.
It was about 9, I measured.
Okay, 9 inches. The steering column was actually snapped off. It snapped off the shaft that goes into the steering box here. This whole inner quarter was, I think, completely euchred.
Yeah,
We
it was a
did,
big U-shaped piece.
yeah. And the core support as well was completely demolished, and you can actually tell a little bit here that this has been replaced, because if you look at the surface right here, it's been ground and bondoed smooth, whereas on this other side you can still see the factory spot welds that are here. But other than that, there's not too much of a record that's been replaced.
The frame rail on the other side, talk about that.
What about the frame
It was
rail?
bent. We had to straighten it, remember? About 3 inches.
Oh, I completely forgot. So yeah, actually, that's refreshing my memory. Once we got this side all cut out, and the car had to be perfectly level, put on jack stands, and we had everything balanced, measured out to within about 1/8 of an inch on the shop floor.
Yeah, it wasn't this shop, just so you know. It was another
No.
shop that we had. That was a
Yeah.
much better floor.
Yeah, exactly. and used a unibody diagram that I had gotten from a member at the Dodge Charger forum to be able to triangulate from the mount points in the frame and make sure everything was square. And what we found was that when it got hit on this side, there's a frame underneath the engine, of course, called the K-frame, and the impact on this side had actually bent the frame rail on the other side as well. So if I remember right, what we ended up doing was I think we heated up with a torch and stuck a long rod into the end of the frame rail, tweaked it over that way until we were sure it was square.
Yeah, we used a come along. We used I think we used a bottle jack because it was bowed a little bit, and we used a straight piece of metal with chains.
That's right. Yeah, I think we might have stuck a bottle jack between the two frame rails.
I don't
or
think the
something.
frame rail was in at that point.
No.
I don't think so. It's been a long time ago, so but we had to
11
straighten
years
it.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. So this side was straight. I did get if I remember right, I got a fresh K-frame when
Yes.
I bought the car, so that we could bolt that in and make sure that everything was square.
Actually, and correct me if I'm wrong, this may trigger your memory. You had a K-frame, and when we went to put it in, it wouldn't line up right, and so you ended up going back to him and buying another K-frame, and we brought that home, and then because we made a special trip down there for that.
That does sound vaguely
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah, I'm pretty sure that
Yeah.
because we were a little bit distraught that the one we had, we might have been able to work, but we felt like we needed a good known part to be sure that all the framework was good. So
Yeah. Yeah, I forget how many K-frames I ended up with. Yeah. We switched to a shot from within the car here. We're looking at, the pedals, obviously. So this whole section of the floor was smashed upward as a result of jumping the car and bending that frame rail. And you can see all the way back here, it's been cut out and welded. And that was winter 2010. In the month that I was back for winter break from college, we didn't have quite enough time to button everything up, and so you had done most of this work after I went back to school.
yeah, I was painting cars out of that shop, so I kind of needed my shop back.
Right.
And we couldn't move it because the car was not able to be back on its own wheels at that point because of all of this not being in the car. So.
And some of this is fresh metal patchwork, and I think up in the firewall more, you actually ended up reusing
Yes.
some of the original pieces and just straightening them out and then welding them back
Yeah,
in.
it was crunched so hard that, and such complex things, that I just decided to go ahead and cut everything out, hammer it and dolly it back, and straighten the firewall out, and then start piecing it back together with the pieces I cut out. So I think the stuff in the floor was stuff that we had made, and
Yeah.
then I think we had it all the way up to like that patch under the pedals.
Yep, there's actually a body or a seam that runs across here, if I remember right, where the floor panels go together.
Yep.
And so from there up, you may have done.
I think so. Yeah, I think we had it maybe up to that point where that piece there is under the pedals with the 3 spot welds, and then I think I did the rest of it up there. So.
Yeah.
So yeah, so that was pretty mangled up. And did this have the 4-speed hump in it at that point, or did you put that in later?
No, this was much later.
Okay.
That was the winter of 2010, what we got accomplished. And do you remember, did he send me a new inner
Yes.
frame or inner fender well?
Yep. So when you bought the car, you also bought the frame rail, the core support, and the inner fender well.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so those pieces all being not brand new, but
Right.
straight, really helps to be able to piece everything together. And like I said, taking measurements underneath of the unibody, we were able to get the whole thing within an eighth of an inch, more or less,
Yeah.
of the factory specs. And then sometime in January, I think it was, he sent me pictures of it rolled out flat on all 4 feet in
Yep.
the snow.
Yeah.
So
It was white with I don't know, there was gold and blue, and I don't remember what,
Yeah,
there was all kinds of
the
colors.
core
on it.
sport was orange, I think, and
Yeah.
the car was mostly white. I think it had red doors.
Yeah, it was. Actually, it was a bronze metallic on an orange, but yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, so, yeah, and actually, your cousin helped some with this too.
Yeah. My cousin Tommy came over
Yeah.
during that time as well and helped with some of the welding probably and
Yeah, just some of the triangulation, because he's an engineer. And,
yeah.
so.
Yeah, like I said, that was winter 2010, and then I had another semester of college, and then I came back to work in Lower Michigan for the summer, and the next biggest sort of part of the project was that it had been T-boned back here.
And that at that point we had moved here, so that work was done here.
This was still done at Gun Club Road.
You're right. Okay.
That was at the same shop that we did all the framework in. Although at that time I was relegated to working in the grass.
Outside in the driveway, because
Outside.
I was either painting the 35 Chevy or the 70, the Dart Sport.
I believe it was the Dart Sport.
Yeah, I think it was the yellow Dart Sport for customer. It wasn't for anything for us. But
So, not sure what happened here, but it from I think here to about here was smashed right in. The deck lid was bent. This whole the trunk floor was bent as well. The trunk extension on the inside was all folded up, and basically I just started by sectioning off straight down here, cut out all of the bent metal, and then also cut out. I think I just cut the trunk extension right off, and similar to what we did on the floor inside, started hammering everything out,
yeah,
hammering it flat, which it turns out trunk extensions are not flat. So that wasn't even the right shape. But started welding that back into place and getting a sort of rough framework for that. And that was really my first time doing fabrication work on my own, I think. It was pretty crude. This is definitely the work on the trunk extension is probably the crudest metal work on the whole car.
it still looks good.
But
Yeah.
it works for sure, and it's a trunk. So what we ended up doing then is this was hit hard enough that it actually pulled the
Oh, that's right.
the back of the car, or the tail pan. It pulled it forward, and so it was the whole back of the car was bent as well. And what we ended up doing, if I remember right, was pulling your truck
Yep.
up to the back of the car.
I forgot about that.
And braced it using a 4x4 or something like that.
Yep.
And then used a come along, so we had the middle of the tail pan braced, and then we were pulling on this end of it
Yes.
in order to straighten the back of the car
Yep.
around. And then from there we were able to take measurements from the other quarter panel, which was straight, thank God,
Okay.
and measure it here, make sure that we had the length and everything correct. And then when I originally bought the car, he included a almost a whole quarter. I think he just cut right through the sail panel with a
Yeah.
sawzall.
Yep.
And so we were able to take a section of that really, really crappy quarter panel that he sent with the car. It was a very, very cheap and rusty skin, just kind of stuck on the outside of a chunk of another car. But we were able to use the top of that panel to build the upper structure here. And so there's a seam that goes all the way through here, and then I think it goes up.
Yep.
And then down, and then so
Got
at
it.
one point we just had just the top of the quarter panel, joined to the tail pin here, and then I think it was like that until we moved
It was.
to here.
It was. I don't think it was fully welded on because I think you and I worked on that. That's why I was thinking we did that here because I was remembering working on the top part and finishing that up here. But I don't think it was. I think we tacked it on over there, but you didn't get it finished. So
Yeah. Yeah.
he's
it
a
was
lot
kind of-
younger. His brain's better than mine.
Yeah, it was pieced together there. This side of the car was just Swiss cheese. There was no sheet metal on the side of it.
He had given you a couple of quarter panel skins, but they were really in rough shape. I think they're still upstairs.
Yeah, you gave me one quarter panel skin, but it was way too big. The dimensions weren't right, and it was also really flat. The body lines weren't right, and
Okay.
they were just very shallow. And so I ended up just deciding to buy 2 brand new quarter skins for it.
I think these were just Sherman panels, right? They weren't big dollar AMDs or anything.
Yeah, every replacement panel in the car is from Sherman.
So just as a note then, Sherman makes about the cheapest panels next to JC Whitney. So there's still a lot of work to do, but again, you can see how it turned out. So it just, if you're willing to do the work, you can save yourself hundreds and hundreds of dollars.
For sure. This car wasn't necessarily done with absolute bottom dollar. I was working a good job and didn't have money living expenses
Right.
at the time, so every opportunity I could, I went the extra
Yeah.
level, and I'll explain more about that later. But the only other thing that I did that summer was to start stripping down the roof as well. So I got that sanded down, and I think that was also one of the first times of shooting primer was to prime the roof. So let's see. I think that actually after we got the quarter panel work done, did end up rebuilding the inner fender as well, at least on one side, and then pretty.
Well, you're
standard-
talking about the rear wheel well, the inner wheel well.
Yes.
Okay.
Inner rear wheel well.
Say that 4 times real fast.
Because this side had been this side had been smashed. That had to be rebuilt as well. So this is the trunk extension that I talked about. I welded in that first summer, and then the inner wheel well has been rebuilt as well. I actually ended up cutting that wheel well out of a 1970 Charger parts car that we had bought, or I had bought. Remember what year that would have been? 2011 or 12?
We moved
maybe.
here in 11, so it had to be after that, so 12 probably.
Okay.
Unless it was the summer of 11 after we moved in, but I doubt it because we were pretty busy moving. And
Right. So yeah, that's where that panel came from, and I think we ended up cutting something else out of that car as well that I needed. The 4-speed hump actually came out of that car.
Okay.
I said I was going to mention that as well, but
You stripped that car.
yes,
That car was probably comparable to what Stitches was as far as rust when you got it.
Actually, it might have been worse than Stitches. It was really, really bad. It was rotted. The rear quarter panels were rotted up like halfway
Yeah.
up to the top of them. Right.
It
through
probably was because I toyed with buying it from you and fixing it, and it even intimidated me. So
It was bad. Some crazy kid out on the East Coast, I think, bought it.
Yep.
So
You stripped it down, every bolt and nut. I think you threw the doors in because they were just all fiberglass, and
Yeah.
a guy came with a it was a 5th wheel trailer to haul 4 cars on, and winched it up on there and drove it to the East Coast. So, and he paid
Yeah.
that guy to bring the car to him. So
yeah, it was completely stripped. I bought that car basically for all the small pieces that would end up costing an arm and a leg to buy individually. So all of the vinyl top trim, for example, thousands of dollars worth of parts there.
That car was actually fairly complete, wasn't it? It was just rotted into the ground. So
Yeah, no drivetrain at all. That I remember, no suspension or.
I don't think it had a rear end in it or anything.
It had a K-frame in it.
Yep.
Because the 70 K-frame turns out is different than the 69, 68 K-frames. But all the trim, tail lights, maybe a bumper or something like that.
So, yeah.
Some interior pieces.
The front fenders were not on that car, were they?
No, they weren't, because those are worth an arm and a leg.
Yeah, and that was a 70, and somebody took that front clip off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the 1970 front clips are really hard to find. They're valuable. So that was one project for that summer, was stripping that down. Once that side of, or this back 25% of the car was wrapped up and the quarter panel was hung and everything, one of my winter break projects was to cut the whole trunk floor out. And I remember it being pretty solid. It was just full of pinholes.
Yes.
But I wanted to, something that looked factory, and I wanted to go the extra mile versus replacing with sheet metal, just a plain piece of sheet metal, which at that time we would not have had the capabilities of doing bead rolling like this. And I didn't want to do a fiberglass cloth or something like that to cover up the pinholes. So I spent the money to get a 2-piece trunk floor from Sherman Parts, and basically spent my winter break from college drilling out about 500 spot welds, and then wire brushing down the frame in this area, which thankfully in this car it was all solid.
Yeah.
No rust problems there.
And the rear frame wasn't damaged from the collision on this.
No, thankfully not. Yeah. So that was all straight. And got that all welded in place, and then ground everything down and did a little bit of tiger hair fiberglass work to get it to what you see here.
Yeah, just to pretty up the spots that needed it.
Yep. I can't remember exactly what part of the car I was working on, but
I think you were working on the trunk floor.
Yeah,
the trunk floor. Yeah, I think so.
Or the what's it called?
The sail panel.
No, the flat piece between the sail panels.
between in the back window. Yeah, I think that is what you were working on. Whatever that thing is called, I can't remember.
Yeah, between the back and behind the back window, there was a bunch of Bondo and welding work that needed to be done there because somebody had stood on it. But
I think elephants danced on it.
Yeah. So I was working on that, and then you volunteered to help me fabricate these little rear valance corners, which were either smashed or rotted out or just full of Bondo.
If I remember right, you had a couple of them, and they were really bad. And so I just took what was left, cut out all the bad stuff, and welded up new patches. They're very expensive to buy, and they don't fit anyway. You have to really modify them to get them on the car. So I just went ahead and said, I'll just make them for you, save you some time, and get you further along on the project. So,
if I remember right, what you ended up doing was to cut the top. This has a flat piece on top of it here, and you cut that piece out and then cut another piece to just bend around it.
yes.
To form the curved shape.
Yep.
And then welded along this seam here.
Yes.
And then liquid fiberglass and sanding makes up for
Yeah.
whatever else you need.
Yep.
And there was a decent amount of straightening that also happened on this
Yeah.
whole rear valance here. It was tweaked, and from sitting on the ground, parts of it were bent. I think it was detached maybe
Yeah.
from here, and so there was a lot of block sanding and tweaking and bending to get that straight as well. Some of my other first sort of metal patching experiences was around this rear window as well. Thankfully, again, this car was originally from Oklahoma. I don't think we actually mentioned
we
that
didn't. Yeah, we didn't
earlier.
mention that.
So it was quite rust free. The floors are inside are almost 100% original, but there was a little bit of rust around the rear window here, and so I spent quite a bit of time making just real small patches, welding it, cutting out the old, and welding in these little patches, and then finishing it off with tiger hair fiberglass.
We didn't have the shrinker stretcher in those days, so.
No, no, it was all done by hand with tin snips and wire welder. So that was some great learning experience that went there, and just nice little tedious work. While I was up here as well, as we had mentioned before, I was also working on this panel here, which I can't remember what it's called.
We'll call it the tween.
Yeah, but between the sail panels, and yeah, I wish I could.
I can't think of it either right now, but that's okay. You guys put it in the comments.
Yeah, put it in the comments. This had been stood on best we can figure, and it was all wavy.
Really bad oil can. The metal was
yes.
stretched so bad there was almost no saving it.
Yeah, bad oil canning. So we actually spent a bunch of time experimenting with different shrinking techniques, using a torch and a grinder and wet cloth, and got it better. I mean, it was closer, but in the end, ended up just welding it solid. There's actually a structure underneath here for something. I don't even know what it's for.
Yeah.
But what we ended up doing was drilling 3 holes in each side here, and then pushing down the whole panel, welding it solid to that, and I believe we ended up cutting holes in the structure underneath so we could actually reach up inside there.
Yes.
You can't see it, of course. Reach up inside there, weld this whole thing solid, and therefore now there's absolutely no oil cleaning. It's very structurally sound, and from there I was able to sand it flat and fill it with fiberglass and Bondo and get it solid and nice. Yeah, after doing that work, I believe one of the next steps was to hang the quarter panel on this side. I may have started to peel this off during a winter break
I think so.
at college. I remember seeing a photo of drilling all the spot welds underneath and starting to peel the panel up. It was rotted on the bottom. It probably would have been an option to cut off the bottom of the quarter panels and just do a here down or here down patch, but structurally it's often easier just to cut at the top of the quarter panel and replace the whole thing.
And if I remember right, this was kind of cut. It was down to here, right? There's the top end that was flanged.
Yes.
Yeah.
So I believe I used either a cutoff wheel or the plasma cutter and just snipped the hole all the way down, probably an inch down, and then bought a flanger and went along there and bent a little step down into the metal, and so the new panel then fits down inside the original panel, and so the welds, it's kind of hard to explain with words, but it steps down sort of like this, so the replacement panel can sink down into that groove, and then it gives you room for your welds to be, and you can fill it over top.
It's I like doing that better than a cut and butt on a quarter panel because it actually gives the quarter panel more strength to have that double layer. So
It does, yeah. And not only does seaming it close to this corner give it more strength, but the the flange itself, because of the angles it bends into the metal, that gives it more strength as well. And then moving down here, the only really other major patchwork that I did on the car was down here in the driver's side rocker panel. It got hit from underneath. Could have been when it was junked or when it was driving, I'm not sure. This was all bent up, so I cut this section of the rocker panel out and then flanged and bent a new panel to go in there and welded it in. One of the last things that I wrapped up before going to the sort of final paint prep work, the last metal work, I'll say, was for whatever reason, like every single 68 or 69 Charger fender that you find is smashed in this nose. Universally, that's the way they are for whatever reason. And so I had spent probably a month building a custom little piece to weld in here because this whole side had been smashed. And per your usual foresight, you had highly recommended that I buy the grill first, which I was lucky enough to find a really good deal on a grill from a guy an hour and a half from here, I think, driving. So the fenders were roughed in Bondo, fiberglass, got the whole front of the car put together, put the grill in, and this side, this fender, the gap was maybe a half an inch on the top, and then the fender basically went off in its completely own direction. The gap is a good inch wide at the bottom, and I was very exasperated and was actually tempted to just leave it that way because I had spent so much time on the front of the fender. But what we ended up doing was taking a piece of wood and a hammer on the side of that fender and smashing the front of this over this way, and it busted all the Bondo and fiberglass work that I had done out there, but and had to redo that. But now, if you look at the car directly from in front, the gap around the grille is perfect all the way around.
But at this point then, the car was pretty well done fabrication-wise, and we were at a point you were he had a mouse in his pocket, at a point to start. Well, you had it in primer, you had block sanded, and you were working on that. And you had talked to a body shop in Carroll about painting the car, and you took the doors over for him to start working on. So why don't you kind of pick it up from there?
Yeah, so I think the car was at maybe 180 grit or 120 grit. We used polyester primer on the whole thing, which is a high fill primer. So I had taken it to that point myself, which I could spray myself and block sand myself and get it fairly straight, but wasn't comfortable with doing the finished paintwork myself.
Right.
So,
and to interject there, you wanted me to spray it for you, and I normally would have, but we had only been in this building at that point for a couple of years, and I had not sprayed anything large in here yet, so I had real reservations about that. So I didn't feel comfortable with, as beautiful as this car was turning out, doing a crap spray job on it. So.
Right, and by then, I had actually decided not to do it at General Lee, which has happened, I think, maybe a year or two into the project.
Yes.
As I started growing up, and really, I didn't want a car that was someone else's vision, essentially. and didn't want it to be tied to the TV show forever.
You said you didn't want to do an icon card. That was-
Yeah. So I had found pictures of the triple black scheme online before and really fell in love with it and decided to go the extra mile because that meant doing it black would mean that I'd really have to have good body work in the car.
I remember in the Charger forum when you said that, you had a lot of feedback from the guys on that saying, "Are you sure you want to do
Yeah.
black for your first car?"
Yeah, good luck. Good luck doing it black.
And you can see how terrible it turned out. So
Yeah, it's awful. So there was a guy, local guy here in Carroll, Michigan, who he used a product that we weren't familiar with. I can't remember the brand.
I can't remember off the top of my head. It'll come to me. But
Yeah, it wasn't DuPont or PPG,
yeah.
Sherwin-Williams. So he had a good reputation with the local auto parts store that I had been going to for all my paint materials. They do me quite well. So we decided to talk to him. He offered to take the doors and put his own product on them and just see how they looked and block sand them one more time. We thought they were really close at that point to being ready for paint. And I think something like 6 months
Oh yeah,
went by.
It was. Yeah.
I called him a few times and he said, yeah, I'll get to him. It's pretty standard
Yeah.
body shop guy. And eventually decided it was really time to just go get the doors, take them back here, and do the rest of the prep work and do the preparation to turn this barn into a paint booth.
Yes.
And just paint it here.
Yeah. We had. It was really at that point he was holding up progress on the car. You were ready to paint it, and we were waiting for him, and it wasn't happening. And I wasn't comfortable, as I said. So at that point, then I think I showed you how to spray more of the primer, and so you were using the 2K at that point and blocking it out and taking it further.
I think you actually, if I remember right, you actually did most of the spraying the primer, if not all of it.
Maybe you would tell me when you're ready, and I won't spray it for you. Probably.
Yeah. I remember maybe mixing the products, but
Yeah.
you did most of the spraying.
I think you felt you weren't comfortable with the material, so I just came out and shot it for you.
There's a lot of forgiveness in spraying a polyester high fill primer, and the spraying technique and just the skill behind spraying a final primer is another level. So basically, I think I spent 6 months or a year. I can't remember how long it was. Just
It felt like 15 years, I'm sure.
layer after layer after layer of sanding and sanding and sanding. To give you an idea of what the progress of block sanding looks like, when you start a panel and lay the first coat of fiberglass, you're sanding at 40 grit sandpaper. And then generally Bondo work, which is a lighter material than fiberglass, is done at 80 and 120 grit. And then you can get sort of the rough shape of a panel at 120 grit, and then from there, a lot of your primer, like high fill primer work, I went from 120 grit up to 300 grit.
I think it was actually 220.
No, I did. No, actually, I did a final block in the polyester primer at 400.
Okay.
I think that was a recommendation by Matt.
Okay. I think what I was meaning was the Bondo, we went to 220, not 120. So,
Okay.
yeah, high bill over that to 400, yes.
Yeah. So then, in the polyester primer, that went from even 80 grit sandpaper in the high fill primer, 80 grit, 120, 180, 220, 320,
Yep.
400, and that's all. Each of those different grits is spraying, sanding it multiple times, spray it again, and then once we got to 400 grit, that's when we went to the 2K
Yep.
primer, and that went from 400 to, I don't remember these numbers as
I
well.
think we just stopped at 600. I don't think we went any higher than that.
Okay, so
So
like
there could be an adhesion problem if you get too fine. Base coat won't stick to that.
okay, maybe. Though so we must have sanded clear at 800, was it?
1,000, 2,000, and 2,500 for the clear. So
Okay. Thought I remembered sanding primer at 800,
maybe you talked to Matt more at that point than I did. So
but okay.
and I'm still
Well-
old school where you paint at 400. So
Yeah, regardless, moving into the 2K, we're 3 more sands at least.
Yeah.
And finally it was getting straight at that point. And yeah, then we called that, right?
well, yeah, again, you were talking to me about having me spray it, and I really just had not painted in this building to be comfortable. And so I normally wouldn't care, but I just really felt like my guts told me I don't paint enough to be able to deal with all the potential problems. I paint enough to know what the potential problems, that there could be potential problems. So we called my friend Matt, who I'm not sure you guys have met on the channel yet. And he said, sure, he'd come over and spray it. So
I think it was fall 2014.
probably.
So I'd had the car 4.5 years at that point. Did somehow did most of the work between college breaks.
Yeah, you did.
Um,
Spring break, you were down working on it, summers, and then Christmas.
Yep.
It was kind of your sanity through school in some ways, as you were thinking about the car and then getting home and working on it. So
Yeah, I did spend a lot of time. I worked at the help desk in college, fixing computers, and there was a lot of free time. And so I would spend a lot of time browsing forums and learning things when I was up there. But fall 2014, we had prepped the shop enough then, and to have it clean enough and ready to be able to paint. Put in a whole drip line system and desiccant filter to hopefully take care of the water problems, and made a plan that starting at like 8 in the morning or something like that, when the weather was still cool, we were going to start spraying. Had everything, had all the pieces laid out. We sprayed the whole car in one go over 2 days.
yeah,
It was more than 2 days.
I think you
but,
based it one day and cleared it the next or something.
Well, we did the back side of
Oh,
all
that's
the
right.
panels
The
first.
jams and the
Yeah.
Okay.
So what happened? Yeah, we sprayed anyway. Doesn't matter. Sprayed everything, and unfortunately, just due to humidity and the heat of the Michigan summer, we started getting condensation in the airline from the air compressor, and it was, like I said, a desiccant filter, had a drip line in it, a brand new, high quality hose as well.
And the desiccant hose that long on the end.
Yeah. Desiccant filter on the gun as well.
Yep.
It wasn't enough, and ended up with a whole bunch of water spots on the top of the deck lid on probably the second day of shooting. So at that point it was a frantic run to sand the whole car again within 24 or 72 or
I think you have
36
72 hours before you have, yeah, so.
Yeah. So I was up till like 3 in the morning, I think, for a couple nights, sanding out the whole car again, and what did we end up doing?
You got some filters from Tommy, and
That's right. Yeah, I borrowed my cousin, who I mentioned earlier, worked at that time. He worked at a pneumatic facility, and they had tons of high quality filtration systems for airlines.
yeah,
So,
water separators, and
yeah, we were able to buy a 3-stage filtration system or something,
Yeah.
or borrow from him.
yeah,
Bought a brand new desk and noodle
Yeah.
for it, and sprayed the whole thing. Then again, clear coated the whole thing, and thankfully, it turned out okay at that point.
you have to remember we're painting in a 100-year-old barn. That's the nature of it, and you know, we've never. Did have a paint booth at one time, sort of, kind of, but where we started this car was in
That was
the
a
best,
nice
the
facility.
best facility, but it was small. So we painted him the north side of this building, and what he did, and so it is what it is. I mean, considering where it was painted, it's turned out pretty nice.
Oh, for sure. You know where to look. There's, we got a couple bugs in the paint, but I'm keeping that secret.
Yeah.
So,
If you ever see the car in person, we'll buy you a beer if you find the bug. Let's talk about the roof. The roof.
the roof. What are your memories of putting this thing on?
I remember we talked about it, and you said, "Have you ever put a vinyl top on?" I said, "No, let's do it." I'd done convertible tops, but I'd never done a vinyl top. So you did, again, tons of research. I did some research, and you found out the best materials and the best ways to do it, and we did it.
Yeah.
Definitely a two-person job.
Yes. Yeah. You definitely need 2 people. I followed guides online. I think there's a famous magazine article online that you can find to do for doing vinyl tops. Basically, the simple part of it is you run a tie-down strap down the middle of the vinyl top, cinch it down, and that allows you to work in 2 halves perfectly to glue everything down.
Remember all that because we've got one to do over here.
Got the link saved. So, and on the Chargers, by far the worst part is the inside of those sail panels. It takes a lot of heating and stretching and pushing and praying to get those to
Praying, cursing, whichever. Both. A lot of glue.
Yeah, but it was a new decision to do a vinyl top car for sure, because I could have just painted the top.
Oh yeah, the roof is beautiful.
Yeah, but I really, really liked the subtlety of doing shiny black with the sort of flat matte black of the top, and then moving towards the back of the car here, we also used a satin black stripe that's very sort of understated and sleek.
So I think the next step then, we had the top on, and you had been working on the stance, which we'll get to in a minute. Just to say that there's a lot of cement bags in the corner, and you were putting cement bags in the car for getting the stance determined. But we'll kind of segue away from that, and let's talk about the power plant.
Yeah, so after getting the paint work done, I got the whole car together, the panels together, and the next step after that was getting suspension under it and the power plant. So this is a 1978, I believe, or 79.
8, I think 8 was the last year.
Okay, 1978, 400, big block. Originally, this car was a 383 big block column shift car. It was a big block grindy car, and I really wanted to go the extra mile and do a 4-speed. And my original vision for the car, even as when I was going to do it at General Lee, was to do this 6-pack setup. Decided to steer away from that and keep it a little bit simpler.
Save the $4,000.
Yeah, a little bit simpler and just do a 4-barrel. But yeah, do you remember? Yeah, tell us the story behind
Okay.
how you came across this engine, what it is,
Yes.
and what's in it.
So the engine is actually a new old stock engine, Automopar parts, direct connection. Actually, it's that old. It was brand new, never been in a car, never had been run, never had been ever installed. And my buddy found it online somewhere. I don't remember where. So he picked it up, and it was still in the crate in the Mopar packaging and all that stuff when he got it. So he tore it all apart, rebuilt it, was going to use it in a project, and never did. And he goes through cars faster than we drink water. I mean, he's constantly, actually the yellow Dart that I mentioned that I was painting when he was working on this outside was one of his cars that I painted. So he had this engine, and he kept saying to me, why don't you buy that engine, why don't you buy that engine? Well, I didn't have anything I needed a big block for, so I didn't want to spend the money. But when we were looking for a motor for you for this, he had gone through it, put a set of heads on it, because it was a short block, it wasn't a long block. It might be 440 heads, I don't remember.
Maybe.
Put a cam in it, it's got a competition cam,
Yep, ComCam.
268 4 something lift on 110 lobe centers. Don't quote me on that exactly, but that's close. So he put the motor together and put it on a stand, and it sat on the stand for years. So he wanted to get it out of his garage, so I knew he would want to get rid of it. I talked to him about it, and he gave Joe a super deal on it.
Yeah, it was good.
It was a really good deal for what's into it, and that we brought it home, and of course it just sat here on the stand for a long time because
Yeah.
you could get it in the car. But then when it was time to put it in, tell them what you had to do to get the 4-speed to work, because this was an automatic crank.
Yeah, not only an automatic, but it's a cast crank.
Right.
So yeah, be forewarned that if you do ever decide to do a 4-speed car, it is an order of magnitude more complex than doing an automatic. So
And expensive.
yeah, the 4-speed transmission, I did get a really good deal from that on a guy. Got a good deal on that from a guy. Maybe an hour drive from here. It's out of a '68 Roadrunner, I believe. It has 60,000 original miles or something like that on it. Came with the big block bell housing, thankfully, and I think I can't remember if it came with the shifter mechanisms
It did.
as well, which I did not end up using. I actually ended up with a set of Hurst shifters from somewhere.
I don't remember. I
Can't
thought it came
remember.
with it. I thought you got the short throw shifter with it as well. You got 2 shifters, but I could be wrong on that.
Okay. Somehow I ended up with 2 different shifter linkages, which ended up going with the aftermarket short throw version. This engine is, they call it a smog engine. It has a cast crank in it. So what that means is that it's not a zero balance crank,
Right.
and the flywheel that you bolt onto it has to be machined and balanced to match the crank, as opposed to a forged crank, which were running the earlier motors.
They were internal balance.
I believe.
And that does remind me, he did put a set of higher compression hypereutectic pistons in this.
Oh, okay,
Yeah, so I forgot that, but anyway.
that's good to know.
Yeah, it's not the stack V 8-to-1.
So I did end up buying a special flywheel for it, custom machined, because as far as I know, they don't really make flywheels for cast crank like late.
They do,
Engine.
but I think it's just for truck. I don't think they ever put
Yeah.
a stick automatic with a. So I have a stack of flywheels, and nothing I had was going to work for you. So
No.
yeah, I forgot you had to buy a special flywheel.
Yeah, and there are options there. I could have bought one with a removable weight that balances it, so it can be used for both forged and cast crank. But anyway, the next step in that parade as well was that because this was this crank was out of an automatic transmission. It was the car that it didn't come out of a car, but it was set up for an automatic transmission. The shaft that comes out of a 4-speed transmission actually slides inside of the crankshaft in the engine.
There's a pilot hole in the back of the crank for it.
Which automatic transmission engines don't have.
Right.
So I ended up setting up a not a pulley system, but a pulling system, and bought a massive drill bit, and basically attached a battery operated drill to the back of the engine, and was able to pull the drill into the crankshaft as I was drilling, and drilled out I think it was a 1 1/8 inch hole into the back of the crank. It was a good inch or more into it. It was a pretty deep hole. Originally from the factory, these 4-speed engines have a pilot bearing that's actually pressed into the back of the crankshaft.
Yeah, way up inside, it's about that far into the crank, and it sticks way up in.
Yep. So to get into the 21st century, to make it easier on myself, there's actually another bearing that you can get, called a roller bearing, I think. It's the same size that goes in a Dakota pickup for whatever reason, and that can actually be hammered into the flange on the back of the crankshaft, and it's perfect size for the input shaft on the transmission to be able to roll around in there and be perfectly centered.
So the hole that he drilled was for clearance for the output or the input shaft of the transmission, but the bearing pressed into the machine part of the back of the crank so that it's concentric. Yes.
So yeah, that was a whole.
You sat here on the floor for hours and hours and hours drilling the back of this crank. Used about half a gallon of oil, I think.
Yeah, probably. So, and then as well with the 4-speed setup, you have to have all this custom linkage for the clutch that goes in there. I had to weld brackets onto the frame rails that are not there on an automatic car, and it's a whole thing. So
Did the 70 Charger have the clutch pedal assembly in it?
yes, that's where this clutch pedal came out of, and I believe the Z-bar and the bracket that goes on the frame rail also came out of that car. So that was a real winner of a purchase.
That car paid for itself 10 times over.
Yeah, to say the least. I also painted. I wire brushed down the whole block. The guy who bought it from didn't prep it right or something. The paint was flaking off.
Yeah.
So I went with high temp primer and paint and prepped it properly. And then we dropped the block we dropped the block in first.
The long block, the motor.
Long block, yeah, and the headers already laid in there, and then backed from underneath, backed the transmission up.
Yeah. I think we did that together, didn't we?
Yeah, because there was a lot of shimmying around, and it's a pain in the butt. But
Wiggle, wiggle, wiggle. So I guess let's fast forward to getting it running, because the motor was in the car for quite a while before it was actually running under its own power.
yeah, we dropped the engine in 2014.
Was it really that long ago?
I'm pretty sure.
Okay.
It was right after being painted.
Okay. Oh yeah, you're right. Yep.
And then I moved to California later that year.
Yep, that's
And
right.
and then I came back in 2016.
Yep.
And I think in 2016, I might have done some suspension work on it. There was some tweaks that needed to be made with the rear end.
Yep.
That was
that's right.
basically it.
Yeah.
I think I did that year.
You put the posi in it and all that stuff, got the motor in, buttoned up.
Yeah.
Brakes
Yeah.
probably were in the rear end, weren't plumbed yet.
That's right, brakes all the way around. And partially because of the collision damage, I think, but the spacing on the back tires wasn't exactly right.
The rear end
left
was
to right.
offset in the car just a little
Yeah,
bit, wasn't it?
yeah, it was just a little bit too tight on one side, so I ended up replacing the spring perches on it and sliding those over just a tiny bit
Yeah,
and
wasn't
welding on,
much.
welding on new ones, which is it's kind of a cheat.
Yeah.
but,
It wasn't enough to affect driveline angle, but it was enough to create a centered rear end in the car. And it quite frankly could have been that way from the factory. These things were plus or minus a half inch on a lot of their tolerances. So.
it was the best way I could ensure of the inner quarters not cutting a tire. So.
And we know the chassis was square, so I really think there was just stack ups.
Yeah. So then I was basically from late 2016 or early 2017, I was not around.
Yeah, you were traveling the world. And,
Yeah, I was traveled for two and a half years or something like
well, you
that.
lived in Portugal for over a year, so.
Yeah. So I came back to the States in spring of 2019.
Yeah.
And that was when we decided to work together and
Yeah.
get the wiring done and just finally hear it fire to
Find
life.
out if this motor was actually any good.
Yeah, and that included buying a brake booster because at that time I didn't have the brakes hooked up yet. Ran the fuel line for the tank. I think I bought the sending unit for the tank.
You bought a new tank too, didn't you?
I'd had that for a while.
But you did. It is a new tank.
Yeah,
Yeah.
newish. Ran the fuel line, installed a fuel pump, just a lot of small jobs like that. And then we finally first fired in summer of 2019,
Yes.
2 years ago.
Yep. Yeah, it was, again, systems, as we've talked about before, especially if you watch the Oakland project. Fuel system, brake system, electrical system, so we really focused on all those systems to the point of power system. And you drove it for the first time then around the yard and up and down the road and so forth in that summer of 19. So
Yep.
if I remember, I'll try to find that video and insert it here. Why don't you talk a little bit about the stance of the car that you chose?
So yeah, I made a few different subtle stylistic choices here. The back end is actually lowered, I think, 2 inches, but 2-inch lowering blocks in it.
Yes.
So that drops the back end right down, and you get this look with the tires being up inside the wheel well, sort of similar to the 68.
Yes.
And the
68 GTS you're
yes,
talking about.
68 GTS. The front end is actually just 2 bolts to adjust the height here, so that's really easy with the torsion bars to drop the front end down. As far as tires, the back, I fit the biggest tire you could possibly fit in a Charger. I think they're something 250,
255.
255,
Yeah.
they're 16-inch wheels,
Right.
which is noteworthy as well because I wanted something that was sort of edging towards the modern style of 17, 18, 20-inch wheels.
Right.
Not so much the 14s or 15s that were on these
Right.
as
You were leaning towards a little bigger, and we talked about it
yeah.
and realized that it was going to not fit the era of the car if you went too big. So
Yeah. I think 17s would still look good on it, but it'd be more of a strong, modern, stylistic choice. Whereas this is kind of riding the fine line between 60s muscle car and modern era. And the last sort of aftermarket stylistic choice that I made is to add a chin spoiler on the front. Well, the spoiler is this part here. It's a plastic bolt-on piece that's bolts to the back of this front valance piece. And the spoiler is actually off of a 68 Camaro, I believe. It's something that I found online that other guys have done, and I really liked the. It just adds a different sort of flair
Yeah.
to the car, and really sucks it down close to the ground, and adds an extra element to this already existing sleekness of the Charger.
yeah, it gives it a little bit of that road rally look.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
I think that's a pretty good overview. There's obviously, we could go on for hours with intimate details about everything, but we wanted to give you a good project overview. For one thing, it's a great documentation on this car, and we wanted to do this for a couple of years.
Yeah.
For another thing, it kind of gives you a nutshell view of, well, a lot of what you've been following if you're watching Stitches is stuff that was done on this car, maybe not the same, but still.
Same ideas.
Same ideas, more fabricating there than here, a lot worse shape there than here. But it just kind of gives you, a big picture of what it takes to take a car that was totaled and turn it into, what's the intro to the show? Turning turds into polished metal miracles? No, maybe that's not it. Junk into polished
More
metal.
or less turds.
So I guess the final discussion we have is, what's next? Where is it going from here?
So, you've offered to start tinkering on it more. I would work on it some. To be honest, I'm still, after years later, I'm still kind of tired of working on this. It's so close to being on the road. I really would love to be able to drive it and take it uptown.
Right. Well, we had talked a couple of years ago about me working on it. It's just life has been
Yeah.
chaotic. But
Well, I have a couple other projects.
yeah, there's that. But it's like the 47. It needs to be done. It needs to be on the road. So
So, next steps, I believe, are to get some glass in it. That, to me, is really going to take it from looking like a shell to looking like an actual car. There's some trim that needs to be added around the passenger side windows, as well as the back glass, front glass trim all has to be added. Some simple wiring stuff, taillights, brake lights, stuff like that. Alternator.
we'll get Mom out to do the wiring.
Sounds good. And the fan does drive me absolutely crazy as a mechanical fan on it. Sounds like a prop plane.
It sounds like a car from the 60s and 70s.
Yeah. So it'd be good to get that replaced. And shocks, just minor things.
Yeah, and so that's kind of what we talked about is, little projects that I can do when I don't feel like getting filthy and welding and dropping hot sparks in my shoes or whatever, and I can come over and chip away on some things on this car to get it forward so that maybe in the next year, when you come home, you can jump in and go to the gas station and put gas in it, drive it home, take it back to the gas station, put gas in it.
So,
Yeah.
hopefully it doesn't drink gas quite that much.
No, it'll be high single digits or low double digits probably. So,
Yeah.
so that's the car. That's the '69 Charger. What are your final thoughts?
Final thoughts. Wow, it's been over a decade,
Yeah.
not of work, but of owning the car and having it be part of my life and something that I still take real pride in showing off to people.
I wish my first car was this good.
And it was a very formative experience for me to do it. I've never worked this hard or this long on anything. I'd say even more so than the short film projects that I've done. Put more hours into this.
Joe's done films and animation. He's a professional animator for industrial instructions and industrial
Yeah.
animator and stuff. So
Robots, AI, new tech, basically new tech. We do animations for it.
So you're a freelancer, you own your own company, and you have a guy that works for you, and that's what you do. So
Yep.
you've
Yeah.
done, I don't know what I can say and what I can't, but you've done projects for Facebook, you've done projects for big name companies, you've done,
Yeah. My pride and joy project right now in that area of life is a CNN called it a fiber spewing robot designed by Facebook. It's designed for stringing fiber optic cable to take internet to underserved locations in places like sub-Saharan Africa.
and that's all public knowledge now. So
Yes,
yeah.
it is.
I've known about this for a long time, but we couldn't talk about it. So.
Yeah, Facebook is real picky about their lawyers are very hungry. But yeah, so this beyond all of the blood, sweat, and tears that I've poured into the film and animation projects, this has been definitely up there,
Yeah.
the big project, and being able to also to learn so much about this part of your life
Oh.
as well, and it's been such a huge such a huge thing for you for your whole life.
Yeah.
That's been a pleasure.
Good. Something I can pass on. Maybe not a positive thing, but
Yeah. To have that to have this project to be able to as a point of connection for us has been a pleasure, and incredibly a lot of lessons learned about craftsmanship, care and excellence, pursuit of excellence, really caring about the beauty of something, designing something to be beautiful, and also about making mistakes, like the front of the fender here, and a half a dozen other places on the car, of having to cut something out and start over, and messing up welds, burning through welds,
the endless burning through thin metal. Yeah.
and welding itself was before doing this car, I hadn't welded.
Yeah.
Apart from fixing the one little thing on the nose of the 74 Dart.
Yeah.
So that was just a lot of skills.
And you've mentioned that a lot of this translates into your day job with just your understanding of mechanics and.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, that's I hadn't thought about it directly with this project, but the skills that I started developing as a kid.
Oh, yeah.
To be honest, I mean,
There's pictures of you when you're 4 years old sanding my 31 Ford. So.
yeah, I had go-karts and we worked on stuff
Yeah.
together since I was very small, but now working with robotics and really complicated industrial machines that my clients have a hard time explaining to people. My job is to help them explain these things, and I can sit down and look at a schematic, I can look at pictures of a machine, and within a 30-minute or an hour phone call, I understand how it works. And I can translate that into something that helps them sell it. And knowing the nitty-gritty of how this works and how metal works, how things are put together, absolutely applies to that. So.
Well, thanks. It's been fun to watch you do this. Like I said, you've done, with me kibitzing over your shoulder, you've done all this mostly by yourself, and that's just incredible. I know you said before, well, you knew you had a safety net, so and that's true. But you really did keep after this thing. You turned out, it's the best car here. I mean, by far, it's the nicest car here. So that's something. Thanks for having me on the show.
Yeah,
it's always
stories.
It's always good to have you. You've been on a few times before, and hopefully some more. And I will get you to help me put the vinyl top on that. So.
Sounds good.
Okay. Well, thanks for being here. I know this is a little bit longer episode than usual, but we wanted to just we've talked for a couple of years about doing this, and we really wanted to just give you the whole story behind this project and everything that Joe's put into it, and time and effort and really what it takes. So, any final words?
No, I think I've said enough.
Okay. And it's cold.
It is. I'm starting to shiver again.
Really
so,
cold, yeah, that's why we're shaking. So,
thanks everyone, and yeah, it's a pleasure.
Yep. All right. Well, you can find us on Facebook. You can find us on Instagram /MyCarShop. And as always, rock.